Well, Parktown Boys pupils have been offered counselling following the death of fellow pupil Enoch Mpianzi. But how will it, or how easy will it be for the schoolboys to move on and concentrate on the academic year ahead? So let's discuss this. I've got in studio with me Fundile Nyati, who's a healthcare entrepreneur and CEO of Proactive Health Solutions. Thanks a lot for joining us this afternoon, Fundile. It's quite it's traumatic, and in fact, it's so traumatic that one report was of how a parent had made an account of how her son is struggling to even shower because the thought of water traumatizes him at that point. Do we actually understand just how traumatizing this entire ordeal has been, not only for the parents, but really for the children who now are sitting with one less learner who was part of the cohort?
Look, I think we have not begun to understand the severity, of the impact of that unfortunate loss of life, during the camp last week. And part of that is because the information is coming out in dribs and drabs. But from what you just mentioned earlier, the young man who was the last one to see him as he was being swept away by the water, the parents are saying he can't even get into a shower.
That's it.
And that's typical, of somebody who has sustained, severe emotional trauma. So at this stage, which is soon after the trauma, it's something that we call acute anxiety disorder, which, if not managed properly, it may actually graduate to become post-traumatic stress disorder, where then this person, whenever they, experience something that reminds them of that particular day, in this case it's water, and then the whole thing, they re-experience it, and it can become a problem. It can even affect that person's, education. So that young man and other young men who were in the water activity are certainly, high risk for post-traumatic stress disorder, and they need to be, given intensive, psychological intervention and possibly even, medical treatment.
Let's talk about survivor's guilt. Yes. It is often a term and a terminology that we don't often talk about, especially in the public, that there's a guilt or psychological ramification that is actually associated with one having made it out. In other words, I'm the one that survived and he did not survive, right? So let's talk about survivor's guilt and exactly what it is and also how could it possibly impact in this situation.
Well, besides the trauma of, seeing somebody, losing life, basically, what compounds it is the fact that, yes, I've managed to come out of the situation, I still have my life, but if only I had extended my arm, if only I had done this, maybe I could have still saved him. So that is a problem. But not only for the young man who was the last one to see him, the others who were in the same activity doing that rafter with him, they also will have survival guilt. It's this kind of thing that you see, let's say there's a retrenchment in an organization. You survive the retrenchment, however, you still are preoccupied by the fact that, why him, why her, so in this particular instance, certainly those boys who were in that water activity with him are going through, severe guilt, and whatever else that we still have not been told about in terms of how they were treated from that point, as they went to hike, whilst they know that somebody has lost a life. So it's the guilt, it's the anger, is the feeling that they, they have not been, led appropriately, and also that they should not say anything. So the guilt about not being able to open up and tell the truth, that they must be in a conspiracy of lie, of conspiracy of silence. All of those things together, they compound the severity of the, emotional, psycho-emotional reaction to
So now what does a parent do? So let's say that, you're a parent and you're dealing with such an ordeal where a young person, number one, was told to be silent, right? So they're dealing with that. They're dealing with the guilt of survival. They're dealing with the guilt of, if only I had stretched out my hand, if only I had been more aware, right? Or even dealing with that as the one who was the last to see him, the issue of getting to water. What tools, what measures are there that parents can take to ensure that their children don't suffer the long-term ramifications of this?
What is important is that those kids, without exception, all of them, they need to be taken to intensive psychotherapy, preferably by a qualified clinical psychologist. because there's some interventions that need to be, put in place. Normally, it should have happened within 72 hours. That's when you get the most out of what we call trauma debriefing.
Okay.
All right? And those who have been briefed, have undergone the trauma debriefing, then you identify those who may actually have a higher risk of prolongation of the symptoms. But at this point, then it is important that they are under the care of a clinical psychologist. Interventions like cognitive behavior therapy and other types of interventions, other people may adopt hypnotherapy. So different proven interventions that will deal with the anxiety, that will deal with the emotional challenges that the person is going through, so that they don't get to the point where it becomes a much more prolonged condition, which is post-traumatic stress.
Fundile, we have to leave it there for now, but very insightful. Thanks a lot for joining us.